The big game is almost here. I break down what I think is going to happen in the Super Bowl. Seahawks, Patriots, we get into next on Beyond the Locker Room. So Seahawks, Patriots, going to be a very interesting matchup. I call it the Redemption Bowl for we Seahawks fans, but I'm going to give you sober and cogent, analysis, as my man Nick Wright would say. So I'm going to give you a breakdown, the Super Bowl matchup by kind of looking at it from how the coaches do, from the strengths of each team. So it's going to be offense versus defense on each side of the ball, and then special teams. And as I said before, we'll get into a little bit of analysis or my thoughts on the coaching and how that matchup will be. So let's get into it. So let's start with the Patriots offense versus the Seahawks defense. What that's going to look like. So New England, when New England has the ball, it's going to really be a chess match on their part. And the Patriots offense has been, like you say, explosive at times. It's explosive for the most part all season, but they're balanced. They push the tempo. They like to mix it up with the run, the pass. May has taken a huge step as a playmaker this year, as we know, stretching the field vertically. So with Diggs and the rest of the guys, while still taking care of the football. They've been very good at that for the most part. Not so much in the playoffs, but most part over the season they have. They can beat you through the air. And of course, they could beat you with the legs, and they also stay ahead of the chains. With that physical run game, as I mentioned, which keeps the playbook and the options available for the for their offense. But let's look at it from the other side and what could be an issue for them in this game when it comes to the Seahawks defense, because the Seahawks defense is kind of almost built in some ways to deal with this type of offense. For one thing, it's one of the most disciplined defenses in the league. Never mind what Woolen did, a couple weeks ago, which that obviously was far from being disciplined, but overall, that is their character. Is also speed kills. Their defense is one of the fastest defenses in the game, and so it's going to be very difficult to go side to side on them. There's going to have to be a lot of straightforward and try and kind of just manhandle them if they can. Rushing the passer, and this is always a key part. I think a lot of ingredients of top teams or teams that win the Super Bowl, you see this ingredient a lot of times, with some exceptions. But rushing the passer without blitzing is such a luxury to have for your defensive coordinator. They tackle well in space, but just going back to having your front four being able to attack, we see out there with the Giants' victories under Coughlin. Where they can just get after it with those guys, with Strahan, JPP, and those boys, and they didn't have to when it comes to the Patriots. They didn't have to blitz, which obviously is which is what Brady feasted on, and not being able to have that gave much more difficulty for the Patriots. Those Patriots to get their receivers open, and therefore Brady didn't have the time he usually would have to pick you apart. That is going to be something that's going to be interesting to see how this Patriots team handles that that front four. I also say in this case here, they're excellent against the run, so that's obviously a case with a mark of any great defense, and they don't give up a lot of explosive plays, which will be an interesting point to see how many explosive plays happen in this game for New England. I think they're going to need a few. I'll just say that. So if you're New England, you probably have to earn everything methodically, to pick and pot, dink and dunk down the field. Try to convert a lot of third downs, which will be a huge part of the game, as always in every game. And I think this one's going to be very much a big one, because they're going to have to find a way to keep the Seahawks offense off the field too. So that plays into both sides of the ball, and being able to make sure that it'll be interesting to see the first time Vrabel gets into the red zone. What's his philosophy? Does he go for it on fourth down if he has to play for sevens instead of threes? It'll give you the mindset of what they think this game's going to be, depending on how he handles that early red zone opportunity. So keep that in mind. So we'll go here. I give the slight edge, to the Seahawks defense. I think they do get a lot of explosive plays on their side of the ball as well too. And it's hard to handle this team for 4 quarters. They're such a physical team and such a fast team. We'll be interested to see how New England manages that. But I give the edge slightly to the Seahawks defense on that side of the ball. Flipping to the other side, Seahawks offense versus Patriots defense. Now, on this side, I think this is more the marquee matchup of the two, to see what happens, and maybe this is where the outcome of the game might lie. can New England's defense keep Seattle's offense kind of at bay? And Seattle offense also is a lot about balance as well too, but they have I think they're a little more explosive with the chunk plays. They want to run the ball early and then set up the play action. So that's the other thing. They love that. They let receivers win one-on-one down the field, and then once they get going, we saw it last week with the Rams throughout the season, but definitely against the Rams games. Once they get a little taste of blood, they're going for it. Darnold's an extremely aggressive quarterback. And so watch that. But on the New England side, when it comes to defensive standpoint, they can't counter that. And Vrabel and that group are very good disguising coverages. They really win on the margins. I mentioned the great play they made to stop the third down a week and a half ago against Denver. It set up the big play on the fourth down early in the game. But they limit big plays, which I mentioned before. They're extremely opportunistic, which is what we were talking about just now with the fourth down in Denver last week. Sacks, turnovers, they have timely stops, which I just mentioned in the postseason. So you got to watch that with them. New England's extremely opportunistic. Vrabel's very good at maximizing those opportunities. They're not flashy. But they're disciplined and they make quarterbacks hold the ball a second longer, with that coverage they have in the back end. And that's where the mistakes do happen. We saw it there, with Stidham. This one's extremely close, but the explosive plays by Darnold in that receiving core, I give just a bit of an edge because of that. So I give it the slight edge again to Seattle on that side of the ball on the offensive side. Let's get it now to special teams. So with special teams, special teams, doesn't get a lot of praise, doesn't get a lot of, it's not heralded much, but in big playoff games, and especially in the Super Bowl, you will find that a lot of times a game is broken open by a special teams play. And, be a punt return, a kickoff return, a block kick, something, that turns the tide in that direction. So from a special team standpoint, the Patriots have a legit returner in this case, that can flip the flip field position in a moment's notice, and their coverage is solid. So watch that with them. Now Seattle on the other side, they've been extremely reliable when in the kicking game. I think one that I mentioned just the other day in the Rams game, a part that no one talked about, is when they pinned them down underneath the 10-yard line on the last possession for the Rams, which really set things up for the defense. But that, the special teams, obviously the fumble on the Rams side, which cost them, and, Seattle was able to pounce on it. So they're very opportunistic as well, too, the special teams for Seattle. So this one's going to be interesting. Hitting yardage, field position, momentum plays, that's where it matters most. And you see it all the time with special teams in the postseason, especially in the Super Bowl. I also, just because Seattle is notoriously known for years and decades, going back to the Chuck Knox era, Seattle's always had this thing in their DNA about special teams. I give, once again, the big play potential of the special teams. I give the slight edge to Seattle on this one too. Now, we get the coaching breakdown. So, coaching. It always matters in the Super Bowl. Decisions have to be made. Do you go for it on fourth down? Do you take the 3? Do you take 7? Things of that nature, when to call timeouts. If you do call timeouts, not calling timeouts. Andy Reid knows about that one, so I'll leave it there. So all these things are part of it, the experience of being the head coach of a football team, especially at this point of the season. Seattle staff, McDonald and that group have done a great job schematically all year. They found ways to pick teams apart. And their defense, especially on defense, they found ways to kind of really get teams in uncomfortable positions defensively. But Vrabel, I gave him a lot of kudos. I've given him a lot of kudos in this pod so far. He has a way of exploiting small things and finding, the advantages on the margins, probably like no other coach besides his predecessor, Belichick, in modern coaching. And I think those details, will come into play a lot because the details matter. I always say details matter in the postseason in every sport. And I think Vrabel will find a way to kind of squeeze as much as he can out of the orange in the Super Bowl, with whatever little, edges he can find. And I think in that sense, McDonald's fantastic, but I think in that sense, I give the edge to the Patriots with Vrabel's experience, his ability to kind of, exploit those exploit on the margins, I give the coaching advantage to New England on that front, which will make it a very compelling game. So, 3 keys to the game as I see it. And this is where I say, I'll start with on the Seattle offense. Darnold, I said, is very aggressive. McDonald, that offensive side is very aggressive. But the question is, can Darnold play a fairly clean game? So, Darnold's production has been fantastic this season for Seattle. He's kept it clean for the most part. He does operate with a very rhythmic style, but he's not the most efficient quarterback. He could go into ruts with heavy pressure. He get a little, get the dancing feet a little going. He'd be tap dancing a little bit, especially with 4-man rushes, that force quicker decisions. And that will be interesting to see if New England can get away with just 4-man rushes or if they have to apply, bring the blitz. If they can get away, once again, it's applicable to them too. If they can get a 4-man rush going on Darnold, I think that will set the tone pretty much for the rest of the game. So protecting him and minimizing turnovers will be essential for Seattle's success. That's one key thing. Second key point, going back to the front 4, but this time the other side. Can't see the Seahawks get their front 4, which is elite. Can they generate pressure without blitzing, generate opportunities for potential turnovers without blitzing? Therefore keeping the extra defenders in the back line, and therefore, kind of like, taking that play action away from May, and also making sure you can shadow May in this, because he likes to use his legs as well too. So that there is a huge part of the game. If they can consistently get home with those front 4, we've seen it before. I just mentioned the Giants. In this case, I would also mention those Buccaneers that won with Brady. 4 down, and they just get after it. The Eagles last year, same thing. Mahomes had nowhere to go. 4 rushing. Carter and those boys coming after him with 4 for the most part. You can do that. You can disrupt. And the Patriots disrupt the Patriots' timing and force mistakes, which we've seen already this year. This playoff run May has been susceptible to. So, he hasn't been perfect in the postseason at all. Been pretty pedestrian for the most part. So there's opportunity if they get home that could be spelling trouble for New England. Third, can the Patriots run the ball well enough to keep the Seahawks, kind of keep the Seahawks honest or at bay, which is the flip side of what I was discussing with the front 4. So if they can establish traction, establish that that line of scrimmage with their 5 up front, then all of a sudden now you're now forced to bring more guys up front for Seattle. The play, it sets up the play action, so therefore it has to keep them honest that way. They're not sure if it's going to be run or pass. Prevents Seattle from kind of just camping in the back line. And, and if the Patriots can then sustain drives, it keeps that Seattle offense, potent Seattle offense off the field, and it opens up the rest of their offense for all sorts of possibilities, which, which they're very clever with when they're ready. So, and that's where things get dangerous. It also gets dangerous when it comes to May and his legs, where he has that opportunity to do so as well, too. So that is the battle that I see happening. Those are the 3 keys to the game in my mind. And we'll see who actually dominates that line of scrimmage when it's all said and done. So, just to wrap up, it comes down to, just to give you my thoughts, slight edge to Seattle on the defensive side, slight edge to Seattle on the offensive side, special teams, slight edge to Seattle as well too. Patriots get the edge from the coaching perspective. And as I said before, keys to the game. Try to find ways that, the execution of Darnold, can you keep the slate pretty clean? Front 4 pressure there coming from the Seattle perspective, can they do so? And then also, can the Patriots establish a run game? Those are, in this case, the pivotal elements of Super Bowl, and we'll see what happens. So I'll just throw out a guess. I'm no betting man, but I'll just say this. Obviously, I'm a Seahawks fan, but just from the sober, cogent analysis that I provided, to quote my man Nick Wright, I like the Seahawks winning. Something like 27-16. Actually, you know what? I'll say 27-15. It always like a strange, crazy number shows up. It'd be due to safeties or extra points. So yeah, crazy type of score like that. 27-15 Seattle over the New England Patriots. They'll be your champions. They get their revenge. The redemption game is won. The Redemption Bowl's won, and Seattle is your champion. So that's what I have here. I hope to be wearing the Joey G jersey next time we speak to wrap up the Super Bowl analysis. But hey, thanks for sticking with me, guys. Once again, as always, you can find me on X, Facebook, as always on Blue Sky, IG, and right here on YouTube, where you can like, share, comment, and of course subscribe, guys. I appreciate the support. As always, you can find me weekly on Basketball Rewind as well too. So hey, keep it locked. Peace.